Greetings and welcome back to another iteration of MGTOW Talks. I am here with Clive, aka CS MGTOW, to talk about something that I thought was absolutely fascinating. He put out a recent video, touched on something that we really haven't seen or talked about ever, to my knowledge, at least in the manosphere or perhaps elsewhere. And it was about the potential of a Malthusian catastrophe in the future, with reference to our behavior in the past few decades, technological development, etc. Now, Robert Malthus, for those of you who don't know, maybe, I'm assuming many of you do, maybe not, he was a cleric and an economist of the late 18th and early 19th century who had hypothesized that given population growth, he was a pessimist, I guess, given population growth, in relation or relative to the availability of resources, particularly food, there would be some sort of huge demographic catastrophe. I think you had mentioned, Clive, that he revised his view on that after he had observed certain things, no?
Yes, absolutely. So as a society, we vastly increased the amount that we could grow on the land. So we planted more resistant forms of crops, animals that could withstand parasites a little bit better. So the kind of I guess the amount of harvest per acre went up to twofold or something over a very short period of time, and that essentially allowed us to beat the Malthusian trap.
Yeah. Now, what I thought was really interesting about this video, and then I'll let you take it away, was that for the first time, someone was pointing out what seems to be blindingly obvious now, but when we pour energy and resources and intelligence, creativity into one particular avenue, be it technological or otherwise, as you mentioned, opportunity cost, something else somewhere else loses out. So when we spend tons of time innovating makeup or iPhones, we're losing out on potential energy and money and time and intelligence that could be invested in aviation and, perfecting desalination or whatever, So maybe starting from that perspective, do you think you can tell us about your general thrust and more about the idea behind the video?
So certainly. I kind of came across an article online which said, look, we're spending 1.2 trillion a year. And when I say we, I mean, this specifically refer to the United States, and I, of course, live in the UK, but 1.2 trillion a year just in the US on goods and services people don't absolutely need. And these were things such as, Halloween's coming up, so, marshmallow peeps, I honestly don't even know what that is, and fake hay, and jewelry, and, candy, and gambling, and I thought to myself, hey, look, that's bigger than the GDP of most countries. That's a tremendous amount of money wasted, but it goes a little bit further, because what then happens is the commercial society that we've set up responds to that form of spending. So every single dollar spent is in essence a vote. So we vote for science to be shifted from doing, really, really groundbreaking research to developing better forms of fake hay that won't blow away in Kansas on a windy day. So I saw it as a massive malinvestment from that point of view. And then I began to think, okay, well, as a species, what are we actually running up against here? And the real issues I see is that at one point we won't have all of these resources available. It's just a simple case of we will, people are, breeding and, having more children, and we keep on consuming more and more and more. And at one point, some of the things that we rely on as a species for our very survival simply won't be there in the quantity. And at that point, I mean, if we already, haven't been hit by an asteroid of some sort, we actually do need to get off this planet to find other colonies that are self-sufficient elsewhere. But we can't do that if we don't have a very, kind of focused goal of actually investing money, scientific ingenuity, research focus, and education in those areas. What we do have at the moment is almost an obsession with the shiny, the new, the small, but ultimately useless. That new iPhone won't benefit us. I mean, maybe Apple's stock price goes up a couple of points, but other than that, I just don't see how this benefits our species as a whole. If the girl sitting across from me on a table, as I went out to lunch the other day, she snapped a photograph of her meal to put on Instagram, but I wanted to pour my Coke over her head. I just found it absolutely pointless.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even beyond the idea of colonizing space, and I mean, to our knowledge, our solar system is not particularly livable apart from Earth, and that in itself is problematic. We're not even taking strides to optimize terrestrial life on Earth. Yeah. We're not improving, largely improving the things that we could be improving because of investment in others. You mentioned iPhones. I mean, think about the food industry and all the food chemists. I mean, people who are studied and well educated in chemistry and maybe biochemistry, and I mean they're paying these guys outrageous fortunes to some extent to just develop, I don't know, better junk foods that make us addicted.
Yeah.
So we keep on buying it. I mean, these are guys who could be investigating things that are actually relevant that would help aid us in making progress, right, instead of the next bunch of crisps that they're going to make us want to consume the entire bag.
Exactly. It's a massive malinvestment, financially, which also drives scientific investigation. It drives the areas where people choose to work. It drives absolutely everything based on the kind of economy that we have now set up in the West.
Yeah, and it's just across the board, be it technology, food. Just prior we're talking about the lack of durability of utility items, and above all clothing. The fact that these days things aren't built to last. And I know to the audience I might sound like some old man, old though I be. I'm not merely lamenting the greatness of some past glory and demonizing the present, but it's very clear if you live life for a couple of years to see how quickly clothing decays, or any sort of utility item. I mentioned to Clive just a little while ago. My father served in the U.S. Army in the early 60s, and I remember using his duffel bag 40 years later, plus well into the mid-2000s. Thing was completely functional, for the purpose of travel and moving. We don't make things like that anymore. Mm-hmm. One, because companies wouldn't be incentivized to do that because they can make more profit by making junk that can be replaced every year or two. And two, we do not have a resource scarce mentality, generally speaking, in 2015, or I would argue in the 21st century, the same one we did, say, in the early 1960s.
Agreed. I kind of narrated a story to you earlier on, something that I found absolutely incredible, because I purchased a pair of jeans, I think it was about a year ago, and after washing them in the machine a couple of times, the color had faded, some of the stitching had come undone, and I was just like, this is insane. So I went online to see if anybody else had experienced the same thing with this jeans brand. And the CEO of the company, and I've forgotten the name of the company, but I'll be able to fish it out a little bit later on. The CEO had said, well, you're not supposed to wash these jeans. If you wash them, you ruin them. And I thought, well, that's insane. When I was young, I would have clothing that I would wear till I physically outgrew them. And then I would give them to my younger siblings, and they would wear them for years. And these things were washed all the time. But now, things that have been made are deliberately, it's that kind of a planned obsolescence, like my new iPhone, my iPhone 6. The things only just come out. My company pays for it, but the battery's now falling apart. Now it no longer holds a charge for a full day, because they're bringing out another one soon. So, and I'm just assuming that by the time that other one comes out, then the battery would have maybe it's gone down to 3 hours.
Do you think that artificial necessity goes hand in hand with planned obsolescence? So in this particular case, you say, you have the latest iPhone. I was mentioning how I'm using the same piece of shit mobile from 3 years ago that I paid $9.99 for. I have no use for an iPhone, but do you, for the purposes of doing business, for example, I guess you need an iPhone, right?
Yes.
Because everyone else is doing it. And yet, we don't necessarily have to live in a world where a requirement for doing business and engaging with people is an iPhone.
Agreed.
I think a simple mobile does the trick. You can call people. It costs about 10 euros, and you can send people text messages. But we tend to extrapolate from that and make it far more extravagant than necessary.
I agree with you. I agree with you, and it's a rush to have the most. And again, that this on its own, I wouldn't be concerned. If people just want to invest in, let's say makeup, and if that's what a woman wants to spend most of her disposable income on, it's the fact that scientific, technical, medical ingenuity is now serving, things that won't benefit.
Frivolity, essentially.
Exactly. So for example, if, let's say, we're investing all of our medical research, money in developing, better breast implants, well, how will this benefit humanity? And the answer is it doesn't, outside of mate selection. So maybe.
Well, yeah, it's getting. I saw an article, a German article, and it's becoming even popular here. So-called intimate surgery, where you have labial reconstruction or snipping or whatever. So that doesn't really benefit anyone except, in the realm of mate selection. Now, I suggested earlier that I think this is part of our evolved psychology, which is to say, we know that, Girl Rights Watch has pointed this out many times, we're always looking for danger and bad things because that's what we evolved in our environment, even when it's relatively safe and things are fine. Likewise, in times of plenty, we overeat, we become fat, obese, whatever, many of us. And I can't help but think that healthy fiscal living, healthy fiscal behavior is only possible in a resource-scarce environment because you're actually thinking about the present and the implications of the present on the tomorrow. Whereas when you don't have absolute resource scarcity or even an inkling of it, you just go into autopilot mode and you just spend and you don't think about it. But maybe what we're in the sort of back of our mind, the subconscious, we're thinking that this is part of accumulating resources we somehow need to sort of survive, even though it's obviously not. Like fake hay or whatever. I don't know, but I'm hypothesizing that overconsumption in terms of spending money on junk and non-utility items is part of our evolved psychologies, because we can only have not everyone, obviously. I try to be fiscally conservative, but most people, unless they're in a bad situation where there's not a lot of food and so on, they're not going to try to save, and they're not going to be circumspect about what they're spending money on. You pointed it out, and Clive pointed this out in his video, but after the crisis of 2008, Americans apparently were somewhat more cautious in their spending habits, and as the economy recovered, whatever that means, that's debatable, they went back to borrowing and overspending and putting credit up to the moon. So I just think the evidence is there to suggest the idea that we just healthy fiscal behavior is probably, for most people, only possible in resource scarcity or just a bad financial climate.
Agreed. And we also noticed this on the governmental level, of course, in the past, particularly when you had a majority male voting bloc. Issues of balance the budget were very, very much, kind of legitimate election concerns. So if one candidate tarred the other candidate as, very profligate and, just look, we do need to balance the budget. Now, talks of, let's say, balancing the budget are just laughed at. What we assume, because we've had a very, very long ball run, let's say, for example, in the financial markets, that debt isn't an issue, that, overconsumption isn't an issue, because somebody else will always pay for it, because the economy will improve at one point. And one of the things that I would love to see research on, I don't know if there's already research out there, is, has the amount of debt that we're prepared to live with increased as we've moved from, let's say, some kind of a nominal patriarchy where men held most of the, kind of political authority, to a matriarchy where the female need drives the agenda so publicly.
Well, I mean, that's an excellent suggestion, and I mean, we have anecdotal evidence in the form of, I mean, to my knowledge, if you look at the United States, debt, obviously, prior to the early 20th century, the government was tiny by way of comparison. Yeah. Debt, to my knowledge, was only taken on, say, during events such as the American Civil War. It was something to be avoided.
Exactly.
And moreover, with a small government doesn't need the kind of funding, excess funding that a larger or huge government needs. So even if debt were taken on, it would be easy to get rid of. I mean, you wouldn't need to borrow the equivalent of trillions of dollars, adjusted for inflation, of course, if the government is, I don't know, 75% smaller than it is now, or 90%, right?
Exactly. And I guess it's also what the money is being spent on. So, for example, if the Western governments, let's say if the UK government went into debt to develop, I don't know, 0 point energy, so unlimited energy.
Yeah.
For me, there's some form that can be justified because the long-term payoff is so great that very, very soon then you break even from that kind of spending, and then in the long run you have unlimited free energy. But it's the nonsense, why I consider it to be nonsense, that it's spent on. The Women, Infants and Children program, which also causes individuals, the way we respond to external stimuli. So if there are all these programs out there, people are more likely to have children for the state to support. So I'm not knocking the fact that people do that. That we respond to our environments, of course. So it's also what the money is spent on. So sure, if the government wants to tax my income for a space program, or find genuinely improving life on Earth, sure, absolutely. But to simply just essentially pacify a female voting bloc in election after election after election, and that's where I guess I just personally find it rather disappointing, and it's just a huge opportunity cost when you count up all of that money and the savings over decades and decades.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, people are going to hate me for saying this. I'm not really a libertarian anymore, but you could, I mean, since I'm not a libertarian officially, I'll say this, that if tax revenue were actually spent on things to bolster humanity, as you pointed out, zero energy, supersonic public aviation, colonizing space, mass desalinization, whatever it might be. You could because we have different concerns now in 2015 than we did in 1915 or 1815. And you probably could find an argument. I would actually be willing to pay some amount of taxes on something like that.
Same here.
But in the States, WIC programs or welfare, and in Germany there's this thing called Hartz IV. It's more or less the same. Things like that. I mean, it's just taking tax money and pissing it away on things that are of no ultimate long-term benefit, and that's my issue, essentially, with taxes, modern taxes. The tax money isn't being spent on things that are worthwhile.
Yes, it's been squandered, absolutely squandered.
And so I don't have within reason, I don't have a problem with taxes if it's spent on something that's going to advance humanity, civilization, etc., but not the crap they're doing now.
Exactly. And I think one of the things you kind of pointed out earlier, which I believe is a really, really excellent point, is you pointed out we have a finite amount of time as a species, as a government. There's only you can only focus on so many things at once, and you can either focus very, very heavily on essentially hypergamy, so. And the focus on hypergamy is seen in the electoral kind of system with just the sheer volume of spending that goes to the benefit of women. And on the personal level, with the fact that, let's say a guy gets a pay rise, one of the first things, he'll go buy nicer clothing, he'll move into a flashier part of town because he wants to essentially attract you know, a quote unquote better quality female. So we can either spend our time as a species chasing tail and satisfying hypergamy, or we can spend our time actually developing stuff, building stuff that genuinely benefits us. And of course, I don't want to kind of you know, be guilty of the either or logical fallacy, but we do have finite time resource, we have finite financial resource, and when we spend it on things of no consequence, we don't just get a zero-sum game. It's actually very, very destructive for us in the long term.
Well, yeah, and I think Barbarossa in a video, one of his earlier videos when he was still in Red Pill Rage, he pointed out that essentially, you know, clothing, fashion is the province of the female. I mentioned, you know, if we could just take all the money from the fashion industry and it just magically make it disappear, the fashion industry, and people would just wear clothing for utility purposes and put it in, you know, modern aviation or, I don't know, modern medicine about artillery, Alzheimer's or whatever. It would be much better spent there.
Okay.
And I mean, as you pointed out, it's true that the vast majority of people who wear makeup are women, but I suspect the people developing the products, who are chemists and whatever, they're probably most of them are probably men.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So we can choose to spend money on crap. And I get female nature. Everyone knows I get female nature, but we can be objective about things that are beneficial and not beneficial. Women might love making makeup and watching makeup tutorials and the products, but if we could once again make makeup products magically disappear and reinvest that in clean zero energy or whatever, you know, something. It doesn't even have to be something that grandiose. Something that's beneficial, like I mentioned before. You know, mass desalinization plants across the globe, that would benefit everyone.
Exactly.
For example. That would be better spent than in makeup. And we have to be honest about male and female nature here being very distinct from each other. This is not something, you know, on this channel and your channel we talk about that, but that's not a mainstream topic. I'm not calling women evil. I'm not calling them demons or anything like that, but men and women have very distinct interests often. I mean, there are some common interests like food and water and basic survival. Beyond that, we have very different interests. And we were talking just prior about the difference between, say, an iPhone and a top-of-the-line gaming rig or computer, which tends to last a lot longer. Yeah. The consumer market being a majority, almost certainly, male. Men are more inclined to, I think, overall buy products that last. And if they weren't so interested in kowtowing to female nature, I would think maybe 80 to 90% of men wouldn't give a shit about fashion. Ever since I left the quote-unquote professional world, I wear the same clothes I was wearing, 8 years ago to some degree. What's necessary is clothing to keep you warm and whatever.
Exactly.
Beyond that, it's just not necessary. And the other thing you mentioned in the video, which I think is very interesting, that the kind of things people dreamt of in that golden quarter from 1945 to about 1970, 71 or thereabouts. I was thinking about it, and I was recalling this cartoon show called The Jetsons. I don't know if you have that.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Nigeria. Yeah. So that ran in the 60s as well as the 80s. They revised it. And it was kind of the traditional, the 50s-ish traditionalist nuclear family with, I think his name was George, went to work, had a housewife, Jane, had a daughter, son, dog, a robot maid. And, of course, they were flying around in flying cars to go to work.
Yeah.
And it just seems that people back then dreamt bigger,
exactly,
than we do now. I mean, you pointed this out in the video, and I have to point out again. I mean, our public aviation, well, it's private, whatever. When we're flying, I mean, we're flying in stuff that was made 40 years ago.
Exactly. There's been very, very little progress to the jet engine, and one of the things we also discussed, but before we had this, discussion, was that nowadays So, for example, if we take the iPhone, and I gave an example of my kind of ex-wife, she said she wanted a computer, so I bought her a laptop. And then within a couple of months, she started grumbling, oh, it's too complicated, and she would just complain and huff and puff. Then I went out and I purchased her the Mac Air, the very light ones. I thought, okay, well, she can't complain anymore. Within a couple of months, she started complaining again, and she only stopped complaining when I bought her an iPad, because it only has one button. So you click the thing to go on the internet, and then you click it to get out of it. It's so simple, and that's the only time she would actually just shut up. So nowadays, it's about simple, small, and beautiful, not necessarily better. And again, it very, very much appeals to the group in society doing most of the spending, at least the conspicuous spending, which is the females. They now have, at least in the private kind of sphere, the majority of disposable income is spent by women, and then manufacturers and companies respond to that by producing not necessarily better, but nicer looking, more kind of emotive, and more something like
flashier, prettier,
to make your friends jealous. That's now what things are being geared towards, which is really, really disheartening.
Yeah, and I think it's it's interesting the different drivers behind male and female mentality. So, thinking in the realm of gaming, a certain game doesn't need to be named, but that there are people who want to, say, get a better monitor because it has it's G-synced and it can process things at 144 FPS, and it's based on the idea that that'll make you more competitive. It's not that it's prettier; it is prettier. It makes everything prettier. Okay, sure, but whereas women, they want things that are just sort of flashier. Just they're less concerned about the function than whatever status that might project to others, and even so, we see that even there, what ostensibly, I want a big, nice, flashy monitor, everyone knows I ordered this supercomputer, and this monitor I haven't opened it yet, but it was really expensive, and it's 144 hertz, and it's G-synced and whatever. But that's just so I get maximum performance. It's not because the monitor in itself is pretty, and I don't want to show it off to people. I doubt anyone will ever see it. I think men and women, the way we approach things, frankly speaking, I think men's mentality is more beneficial to the world. If we're interested in things that perform well, that enhance something, that's going to enhance the world ultimately as well. Whereas trinkets and trite objects that are flash and shine and are pretty, they don't really do anything.
Agreed. It actually reminds me, because I'm scripting a video on the kind of gender divide in allowable technology. So one of the things I'm starting to see in my research for the video is this, and I picked the issue of nuclear energy. The majority of men support nuclear energy, or the developments of nuclear power plants. The majority of women oppose it, and of course, because the majority of women oppose it, we can't have a viable kind of nuclear power plant industry.
No, they're worried about the safety, I imagine.
Absolutely. And within women, women aren't a homogenous group. It's very, very much a certain type of women. So, I found a really incredible piece of research which suggested that women who hold more traditional gender values tend to be against nuclear energy. So when they have children, well, they hold traditional gender values. So they just develop an incredible aversion to risk. And when you look at the actual incidence of nuclear energy safety versus, let's say, fossil fuels, nuclear energy is statistically infinitely safer. But as long as women have the quote-unquote feeling that it's not safe, then that entire field of development simply comes to a grinding halt.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see. I'm just thinking right now out loud what the difference in ratio to, say, oil spills, for example, to major large-scale nuclear accidents.
Exactly.
As in, probably, as you pointed out, I haven't done the research, but you have. You say it's a lot less likely.
Oh, absolutely. Even, for example, I off the top of my head, because I'm about halfway through doing the research. The kind of largest nuclear incidents in Europe, I believe, again, it's off the top of my head, less than 20 or 30 people died, but when you compare that to even just a minor oil spill, which will cause catastrophic, kind of damage to
environmental damage, damage to animals, plants.
Absolutely. So the evidence points to nuclear energy, at least at the moment, being very, very safe. And again, I'm neither pro nor, I'm not a nuclear energy, exactly. But what I would be in favor of is humanity exploring, because of course we do have some degree of risk in any new technology, and men, it seems, are more psychologically, I guess, able to handle risk and understand that reward comes with a degree of risk. There is a possibility that things go wrong. However, even when things go wrong, we learn from those things. But what's happening is that because of the fact that how women vote and the kind of politicians they vote for, and the fact that the political class will almost certainly kind of listen to that kind of women's bloc, and there's been a very, very powerful female anti-nuclear bloc, an incredibly powerful and vocal one, and as a result of their politicking and their needs, we won't get to explore nuclear energy properly. And it's also not just nuclear energy, it's what comes. So when we then fully understand how nuclear energy works, this leads us into other areas of research and understanding, and all those avenues are just simply shut off in embryo. We never get to truly explore.
Yeah, and I mean, this is more metaphorical than anything, but if our hominid ancestors, our male hominid ancestors, had been afraid of fire and mastering fire, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Exactly.
If the females in the tribe of, I think it was Homo erectus that originally started using fire. No, we can't do this. And there would be, we wouldn't be here. So
exactly. Well, imagine if let's say in the first guy who discovered fire, the woman next to him, her hair caught on fire. That may have just ended the development of the human species.
I don't know. Certainly there are different circumstances.
Sure.
And I'm not sure of the female input in Homo erectus, but it was just sort of more of a metaphor that
Sure.
Sometimes you have to play with fire and there's a risk of getting burnt, but most of the beneficial things we see today were based on risk.
Exactly.
If the Wright brothers hadn't taken the risk that they did, I'm sure maybe someone would have come across the idea. Or we know that Leonardo da Vinci tried a flying machine. I mean, you don't get there without taking a chance. And if more than half the population is concerned with safety to an umpteenth degree, then how we're going to get anywhere? Because all we can do is work with the tried and true and what we already know. Meanwhile, they think it's a worthwhile investment for chemists to develop more makeup products and manufacturers to manufacture more handbags and fucking ugly shoes that cost hundreds of euros, when all that money could be going elsewhere.
Exactly.
I think in 2015, the only argument I can make for taxes is if it goes into things we're talking about: useful utility based research, energy. Hey, why not? I mean, people talk about this. For example, why not laboratory manufactured meat that's of much greater quality? Even that. We don't have that much to going into that. Get rid of the makeup crap and start investing in that. Food chemists. Hey, why don't food chemists start doing that kind of thing? No, they need to work on Cheetos and Doritos, right?
Exactly.
No, but it's true. I mean, I've watched documentaries on this. Highly qualified PhDs in chemistry, specifically food chemistry, who probably could contribute to worries about world hunger and the idea of laboratory meat, which would calm down vegetarians and be of higher quality. You probably could inject omega-3 fatty acids. You could do all kinds of things potentially, but no. Instead, they're being hired by Kellogg's to develop the next cereal that's going to make you want to eat the entire box in one sitting and then go buy the next one.
Exactly. Or the next cereal they can say is 1% of fat lower than the previous.
Yeah. And the thing is, everyone needs money to survive. So the scientists then think, these food chemists think, well, nobody wants to hire me for a quote unquote real job for some important research. I'll go work for the Doritos guys. Why not?
Exactly. Well, it shifts the kind of scientific basis of our species in that, as you've pointed out, then all of the young scientists come through, instead of, let's say, working for NASA or even if it's equivalent private kind of group, then everybody rushes to work for Kellogg's. And again, I don't see how this benefits our species to have a slightly better tasting brand of cereal. Yeah, for me. That's,
No. Well, I mean, I think no one could offer an argument as to how it would. No one's going to say, it's beneficial to the species. I think the only argument some people might offer would be that, we need our leisure time and leisure products, and we need, it's not an either or. And I would agree that it's not completely an either or, but in terms of proportionality, it's becoming an either or, because we waste so much money, time, and energy on crap, basically. We could potentially in this year, in our 21st century, have a human renaissance. We could have all the chemistry and physics done. We could have intense sociobiology without the fucking offense industry involved, where we really start understanding human beings, making it public knowledge. We could do all this stuff, but we don't.
Exactly. Instead, there's a whole industry geared up towards making smaller iPhones. I can't tell the difference between the current iPhone and the old one. Apparently, it has a better camera. The screen is of better, quality.
Maybe. Maybe if you were a master of selfies, you'd be able to tell. You could take some selfies and compare the old ones to the new ones. Huh?
That selfie culture is one of the most aggravating things I've ever come across.
Well, unfortunately, men are catching on, but to my knowledge, it's mostly women still doing the whole selfie thing. And it's not just it's part of a broader culture. I notice
it's part of a much
taking pictures of food in fancy restaurants and then posting up on Facebook. It's just such a frivolous and waste of energy. I know that I mentioned her before. This girl from Hong Kong who was a PhD in applied linguistics, and I never see her on Facebook discussing anything, academic, or it's pictures of her and her boyfriend in some fancy restaurant with, some overpriced dessert half the size of your palm with a fucking mint leaf on top and a glazed cherry. You know the kind of thing I'm talking about. And there's a picture of that, or her jetting around the globe on her father's dime, or whatever, in Italy or in Siena. That it's part of it's just. It's incredibly frivolous. Not to say that men don't do that. I've seen men that do. It's just proportionally, most of them are women. And
sure.
What I talked about in the prior talk with Coltrane is this is part of a bigger problem, that we think the mere presence of something, in this case women, is a good thing. That merely by having women in the workplace, or merely by having women participate in Facebook, or merely by having women participate in market consumption, that the mere presence of women is a good thing. Now, I would never argue that the mere presence of men is a good thing. I would try to back it up with evidence. Yeah. But these people, they think that just having women, this in itself is a good thing. So, women in this department at the university, okay, that's good. Why? Because they're women. Yeah. It's a circular argument. Exactly. And why are women good? Because women are women. Exactly. Until we can break that mentality, then we're going to be, I think, ultimately stuck in malinvestment of time and energy that you've been talking about and talked about in that video. Now, another thing you touched on in that video related to, you call it the second Malthusian trap, and I think it's pretty apt. We don't know when it's going to happen, but organisms on Earth have undergone or been exposed to various extinction events precipitated by mass catastrophes. We're actually in an extinction event right now. It's called the Holocene extinction event. It started about 10,000 years ago, the transition of the Pleistocene Holocene. Hasn't really affected humans, but every other species pretty much. We're, unfortunately, for better or worse, the main cause. But there are others. You mentioned the Permian Triassic one, which is the biggest one, where 96% of ocean life was wiped out and 70% of land life was wiped out. I mean, most people are familiar with the Cretaceous one, that basic Jurassic Cretaceous one that happened 65 million years ago. Wiped out. I mean, we're not prepared to deal with something like that. And even in the best case scenario, let's say we have something somewhat milder than the Jurassic Cretaceous event, that maybe some human beings would survive, and we would be set back, depending on what happened, potentially millennia in terms of technological progress. And by the time we recovered, we'd be, back to hunter-gathering and all that. So
well, we may not even end up, I mean, it may set us back so badly that we may not be the dominant form of life on this planet any longer.
Oh, I certainly. I mean, you take away our technology, I mean, the 10,000, 12,000 years ago, animals were a real risk to you. I mean, there's a reason, presumably, I mean, the beginning of the Holocene extinction event, which is ongoing, but in probably around 10,000 years ago, there were so-called megafauna, huge, large animals in North America. They just disappeared. Now, presumably, a lot of those were herbivores, but an American lion was bigger than Africa. I mean, that was a real danger to you if you're running around with a spear and a sharpened flint tip. You don't have the advantage. Now, if you have a buckshot, rifle and buckshot, that's different. But yeah, absolutely. I think that would set us back. That would be part of regressing, basically. Now, who knows if that's going to happen anytime soon? Geological time span is far beyond human comprehension. But the fact that we don't even think about that, we're very much living in a live for the moment kind of thing, which is great. I mean, we need to focus on the present. Getting too hung up on the past is bad, and getting obsessed over the future to the point where it cripples or paralyzes you is bad too. But I think the golden mean is appropriate here, and we're just too focused on whatever selfies we can take now and all the crap. I mean, the consumerism. This is actually related. I was proofreading this essay, and it was about earlier concerns of 20th century intellectuals about the public not getting essentially their fair share say in politics and participating, and having basically an open platform, a public platform, and talk about these things. And then you look at the internet, and they do have it. And instead of being concerned about quote unquote real issues, they're watching PewDiePie or Michelle Phan makeup tutorials, and we're not very inclined to care about most of us about these so-called real issues, these more important things. And I think when things used to be more scarce and life was more difficult, perhaps people still didn't care, but necessity forced them to be more productive in a more sensible way than is now.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. Because we respond to our environment. So if there's plenty, and we respond appropriately. If there's a shortage, we respond appropriately as well. And for sure, I mean, one of the things I'm really beginning to struggle with is the concept of, can we truly develop as a species when, let's say, women have so much autonomy, due to the fact that we're biologically programmed to basically give them whatever they want? To what extent are we able to make any form of progress in the long term when half of the planet is geared up towards selfies and, makeup and high heels? Not only do we have the massive malinvestment from the female side of things, but also the male side of things.
Right, because they're too busy chasing tail. I'm working on a video not tangentially related to this. It's sort of do with human mating patterns, but I think there's still. I'm not optimistic, but we can make progress. We are making some kind of progress. Yeah. It's just it's not optimized and it's not optimum. I mean, we have to be honest about something. Those of us who've taken the time to look at the data, that absolute female autonomy probably, and maybe even almost certainly slows down civilizational growth, unless you, of course, count as civilizational growth selfie culture, iPhones, makeup products, and Cheetos and Doritos. Now, of course, men consume these things too to some degree, but the overwhelming majority of people who push for these shiny and non-utility items tend to be women.
Exactly.
And as you pointed out, when they're the majority of consumers because they have access to the majority of the money spent on things, then what do you do? Now, I don't think there's a real solution for this because short of doing something absolutely draconian, that's not going to change.
Yeah, okay.
So, however, we could take professional scientists could actually start researching these things. I mean, the data are available. If we amateurs on the internet can put together compiled data into a video and try to figure things out, people who've been doing this for decades could too. It's just this is where the chokehold on free speech and the so-called defense industry comes in. A lot of men, I guess more traditional men, they're angry at feminism and the political climate because they can't get married and shoot up some woman with their sperm. I don't care about that. I care about the fact that you can't have honest, real, intellectually honest research and discussion on topics that, quote unquote, might be offensive or might make people feel uncomfortable. Because along with all the other stuff we talked about, the more technical sciences, I think we could easily develop an accurate science of the human, which would be largely sociological and biological, but we can't do that either. And that's why I get angry at feminism and progressives and the politically correct, because I think that's part of it. We have the technical side of things, but the technical side of things can't be put into effect unless we understand the socio-biological side of things, because that's what's driving the decisions that make people invest in technology or not, or invest in scientific progress or not.
Exactly. It's, so for example, one of the authors, he was a technologist, I believe, and he said, look, the field of physics has pretty much just shut down. I mean, very, very little progress has been made over the last 30 or 40 years. And of course, as women are rushing into the STEM fields, we're not noticing any progress, but what we are having are, what they, where you can't have debates because they don't like this particular speaker because he didn't say something positive about women, or he was wearing a T-shirt they didn't like, so they campaign against him. It's outrageous. It's become absolutely outrageous that whole fields of scientific inquiry are being shut down the moment they enter it. The internet was supposed to liberate us and provide us free speech, and now it's become the kind of death ground of any rational debates. So what tends to happen what I see online these days is that if you're a public figure, you can't be honest. But
no, this is simply not possible.
They will shut down.
It's why I've ultimately made the decision not to, return to academia in the capacity of, say, evolutionary biologist or psychologist, studying towards that end. I wouldn't have the freedom that I would need to do the kinds of research I would want to do.
Sure. And it's very, very difficult, I guess, to get tenure. If let's say you're not an avowed feminist these days. So I guess, for example, I'm so grateful that Professor Mills, he's already very tenured and he can therefore say whatever he wants. But most of the younger academics just simply won't have any degree.
Especially the kinds of topics if I were, let's say I were an evolutionary psychologist or whatever, the kinds of things I would study would be, the effect of female vote on government growth, hypergamy vis-a-vis divorce rates, the relation between, marriage stability between urban and non-urban environments. And I would actually point out the effects it would have on the public. Another thing I've noticed, and I don't know if this is directly, I think it's to do with political correctness as well, is that scientific discoveries and scientific data, these things should have no bearing on public policy and no bearing on our lives. It's just they kind of stand on their own. So right now, I don't want to spoil too much. I'm looking at some new data that came out about a year or so ago on some very interesting things that happened in the fairly early middle Neolithic period to humans. And I'm going to be able to link that to much later occurrences in the late 20th and 21st century. Now, people would say, well, that's just data, and the data just stand on their own. Yeah, you can have it that way, but if we have a public policy, government, whatever it might be, of whatever sort, that's uninformed by human nature, if we just sort of blindly say, we'll just do this without thinking about the consequences, well, we get what we have now, exactly. Which is lots of government waste, over-taxation, and tax money spent on crap, not on useful things. We get the Anita Sarkeesian, I mean, I haven't been really following it, but I'm sure you heard about this whole UN thing.
Oh, yeah. How, she and Zoe Quinn blew.
I mean, I just, first off, I've said this a million times. I'll say it again. She's a charlatan. She doesn't believe this stuff. She's a businesswoman trying to make a buck.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know about Zoe Quinn, but it's I don't know, maybe they trade stories about how they can shyster everyone out of their money. I don't know, but this is what we get when we don't take into account the details of human nature and indeed the distinctness between the male and the female. I mean, this is not something we can really afford to overlook anymore. On the individual level for the man, yeah, if you wanted to date or marry, okay, that's very relevant as well, but we're talking about on a mass scale. We're talking about observable patterns, such as pointed out in the Hong Kong study, where you see women from mainland China just trying to scoop up all these wealthy Hong Kong men during the reannexation by China. You see these patterns repeatedly, and it's very telling. And to draw no conclusions on that, and to say that public policy should have nothing to do with scientific data, I think this is another sort of after effect of we're too afraid to say certain things.
Agreed. And what I tend to kind of really understand now is this, that there's a place where we dare not look as a species because of what we will be forced to confront. So, for example, if we're very, very honest, we'll say, look, you can't have freedom when the female electorate, is present and is politically enfranchised. So you either would have to deny them the votes, or you would have to deny, let's say you deny everybody the vote because, hey, look, we can't say just one half of the population, can't vote. But then you would have to say to everybody, look, there's this part of your nature that will just want to give women whatever the fuck they want. So we can't have that controlling the public purse strings for very, very obvious reasons. And there is that kind of side to us as a species that there are some truths that we simply will not confront about our nature.
Yeah, and Clive, I think you hit on something important here, and that's we kind of have an ideal that we like to nurture of liberty and freedom and free to be you and me, and we're all just doing whatever we want. And once again, I'm not advocating anything specific, but as you pointed out, the kind of male freedom that many men yearn for, the kinds of projects we talked about, scientific projects, research projects, tax money being spent elsewhere on useful things, relevant things, none of that seems compatible with a majority female electoral bloc. And barring, something extremely autocratic, we're not going to get the things we're talking about. And that's fine. If people and men and women want to live in that kind of society, that's fine. Now, it might be, I'm not saying for sure, I don't know, that a more scientific society could only be begotten of a more autocratic state of governance. I don't know, but it's possible.
It is very possible.
And that's scary because, we went through, ever since the Bronze Age, essentially, through, kings and warlords and city-states, and then we had the Roman Empire, and then feudalism, and then various monarchies until the end of the Enlightenment, more or less, and then we have this wonderful thing called democracy, which of course goes back to Greece, but whatever. And we think that we kind of more or less figured it out. Everyone has a say, everyone can do everything they want, And it sure feels good. So on the surface level, yeah, it's great. We're all free to be you and me. But it is possible. I mean, I have to be open-minded, intellectually open-minded about every possibility that a more autocratic and stricter society would lead to overall better results. This is not me endorsing any particular structure per se, just saying that it might be a possibility, and that's something that, frankly speaking, could never be said in the open.
Sure.
I'm not politically correct, and I'm not endorsing anything, but I'll say it's a possibility, and to deny that's a possibility, I think is intellectually dishonest.
I agree with you. I mean, there's a really, really excellent book on this topic by Hans Hermann Hoppe, and it's Democracy, the God That Failed, and I read the book probably about a decade ago, or maybe 7-8 years ago now, and he pointed out that, look, under a democratic system versus, let's say, a monarchy, the politicians under a democracy are necessarily concerned about the next election cycle. So there's very, very little long-term planning. And of course, they don't have to bear the consequences of poor policy. But because let's say the monarch saw the kingdom as his or her personal property, there was just a far long-term system of kind of planning and a desire to increase the value. And again, like yourself, I'm certainly not advocating a monarchy, but I do believe that we now as a species unthinkingly put our, hey, democracy has to be good because it's practiced by half of the planet. But and for sure, versus other more tyrannical forms of government. I mean, look, I personally prefer to live under a democracy versus, let's say, a totalitarian, communism, for example. However, we may be entering a stage in our development as a species where our needs have fundamentally changed, and the democratic system may not fully reflect the kind of things we need to get done. And again, I'm not suggesting that we go to some kind of autocracy where we just have or even a fascism. However, democracy may have run its course. Now we understand much more about human nature, or possibly a part of the human species is being honest about female nature in particular and male nature, to say okay.
It's funny you mention that because given certain revelations in recent years, I'm not endorsing it, but I'm somewhat more sympathetic towards a monarchist point of view. But I think, in fact, despite less overall knowledge, people of the past were more honest about human nature because the stakes were so much higher.
Yes.
The kinds of fuck-ups we can afford now, due to largesse and comfortable environments, they couldn't be afforded back then because it would have wiped out entire communities and city-states and so on and so forth. So yeah, people had a much more honest view and I imagine discussion of female nature. If you look some of the Greek authors commenting on that, and indeed, if you look at literature, I mean, nobody can say this in a public academic environment, and obviously I'm not religious. Sorry, but if you look at things like the Bible, the very famous, the fall of man, or Eve is tempted. Another even earlier, predating that, the Epic of Gilgamesh, where I believe it was the goddess Ishtar who tries to tempt Gilgamesh out of his tasks that he's trying to achieve. I mean, yeah, does it present women as seductresses and temptresses and so on? Yeah, but maybe that's part of it, because the metaphor there behind the seductress or the temptress is that the female allure will tempt the man away from whatever task he has at hand that he needs to complete. Now, if we extrapolate that sort of biblical and Sumerian metaphor into the present, chasing tail and trying to impress women, the temptresses, that extrapolates energy away from productive activities such as space exploration. I mean, space, we don't even know most of what's going on in the ocean. Exactly. I mean, 70% of the Earth is covered in water. I mean, so there's a lot of power in these metaphors, and I think the ancients understood certain things because they had to, and they spoke about it openly. But in any modern environment, you just say that's misogyny. And of course, if someone were to hear me saying this without the context, or even with the context, they'll call me misogynist as well. But it's not an intellectually honest conversation to just disregard men's desire to impress women. I mean, honestly, how many men would... I think the thing you brought up in the video that really hit the nail on the head was back in the day, in the quote-unquote, golden quarter or so, or thereabouts, courtship was, a short ritual. Maybe you had a job, you got a wife. You didn't really have to worry too much about her divorcing you. She stayed at home, took care of the kids, and you got to your job and you did what, you thought you did, and so on. Whereas, today it's this never-ending back and forth of dancing through hoops, and the PUA specialize in this. They know this. That's why they exist.
Well, it's a whole genre. It's called marriage game now. And you've got to speak to her in a certain way and exert leadership in a certain way, and
all this energy,
exactly.
And Barbaros talked about this in his PUA refutation about just trying to impress women. That's what male energy expenditure is about these days, more or less. And so we go back to these ancient metaphors of temper, and we see this as well. I mean, anyone who's read Homer, the Iliad. I mean, what is the Iliad about? It's about many things, but the woman, Helen is kidnapped, and because of a woman, she was so beautiful, her beauty, female lore, they go to war, and lots of men kill each other. That's not really a good outcome. It makes for nice poetry, epic poetry, but whatever. There are so many metaphors in the past that we actually ignore this at our own risk. The ancients knew, maybe not as much as we do now, but they were certainly more honest about the things that they did know. And we don't pay attention to that. I'm hardly suggesting that the Bible is a tome of great wisdom and knowledge in its totality, but it has certain slivers of wisdom in it, and one of them is that the role of the female temptress, and I'm not using the sense of, she's actively chasing after you, but women tend to redirect male energy to the pursuit of themselves,
exactly,
as opposed to other more productive endeavors that would benefit everyone, including women.
Exactly. Well, it's usually found in that statement, he needs to, quote-unquote, grow up, which essentially means, settling down with her, providing, fathering children on her, and focusing all of his financial energy or financial resources towards her comfort. And this is contrary to, that kind of curious little boy in you who looks up at the stars and then one day decides to become an astrophysicist, or one day, decides to become, a biochemist, or an evolutionary psychologist, to answer really, really important questions about the species. All of this energy is diverted to just essentially just a human sex drive, and so instead of, let's say, becoming a mathematician, the guy goes to work on Wall Street. And I'm not knocking that, but because of course he wants to have a nice car, a nice apartment, so he can sleep with attractive women, and that's just what we tend to have now, just wholesale.
And it doesn't, Clive, it doesn't even need to be that overt. I've met and talked to many men. It's not a conscious. They don't think to themselves, I'm going to take this job so I can fuck lots of girls and have, It's just they know subconsciously that the status that would be accorded to them, and the money, which is pretty much the same thing, will give them that edge. I mean, I think most men instinctively chase status, and they're willing, for example, let's say job A is significantly more boring, isn't really the thing he's interested in, isn't quite as innovative, but pays him 30 to 40% more, versus some other job which has a lower salary, but really is the thing he wants to do. What do you think? What do you think most men are going to choose in that situation? Well, some might choose the latter, but I think more would choose the former.
Particularly if they're married or if they're in a relationship.
Absolutely, if that's the case, if long-term relationship, because men know that's what women want. I pointed this out long time ago. I believe it was my Escape Velocity video, that male intellect doesn't interest women beyond what male intellect can garner financially or status-wise for women.
Exactly.
They're not interested in, a guy who's a botanist researching plant-based antidotes in the Amazon, who's getting his knees dirty and getting, cut up by leaves and bitten by ants or whatever, because he's passionate and really thinks that, we'll find some cure for some disease with this. So, well, no, he's just a dirty. They'd rather have some guy who, I don't know, an electrical engineer who does a run-of-the-mill, no offense, electrical engineer job, making pretty good money. This is not universally the case, but generally speaking, that's the case. And we need, I think, as a society, to be honest about this. Now, I don't think we can because, when I did my talk with Girl Writes What on the Honey Badger fireside chat thing.
That was a great chat, by the way.
Oh, well, thanks. I think it went reasonably well. I know people are giving me shit for endorsing Karen, but I do so not because she's proven herself intellectually honest and supportive, and there's no reason not to. So, if you have a problem with that, then don't subscribe to me, whatever. But anyway, when she made some statements to the effect of, women basically being looters, the equivalent of looters, and people just flipped their lids. And you had male commenters in the comment section, you're turning into just a feminist. I can't deal with this. Or you guys sound like Jared Taylor and race realists and blah, 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 and just kept on. And, these are the people that want to just put the veil over their faces and just not see, or monkey no hear, monkey no see, monkey no speak. If even in a community of so-called anti-feminists, you can't have an intellectually honest conversation about female nature, where to them there is no such thing as female nature, just we're all people or some crap like some nebulous crap like that. We're there's no reason to be optimistic, even in the so-called anti-feminist community. And I'm not an anti-feminist, whatever that means. You can't be intellectually honest about these things. We're screwed. And that's what I was talking about in my denialism video. The fundamental problem we have isn't necessarily per se with progressives, although, they're a big part of the problem.
Sure.
It's with people who aren't willing to have an honest assessment of human nature. And I'll give you another example. A while back, I was talking to a gentleman for the first time, and we're talking about basically came to female nature. We agreed about sort of progressives and all this other stuff, and I was talking about female nature, and then I talked about women, and I said, well, your sisters are basically that way too. I didn't say that directly, but my sisters aren't that way. It became the case of exceptionalism, right? Because they're genetically related.
Yeah.
And he asked me, he said, I said, well, do you think your sister would have married a street sweeper? Because the husband was, successful businessman. I said, well, of course not. But would you have? Well, I said, well, number one, men don't operate on that principle. If the street sweeper woman looked good and were pretty and had nice skin and hair, then yeah. I'm not going to get married, but yeah, probably. So even people who are overall intellectually honest and unfortunately, specifically motivated by a specific ideology. When they're confronted by something personal, like their sibling, their sister, or their mother, or their daughter, all bets are off, and these people become exceptions that they simply cannot be because they're human beings too, and in this specific case, they're female humans. So we can't have a conversation about that because even people who are anti-feminist or anti-progressives, they set themselves limits in the sense that the personal is then off limits. Now,
sure.
There's nothing, I'm not trying to personalize something by saying to some person, whoever that might be, it doesn't need to be this guy, yeah, your sister is this way too. I'm just saying that's the way, generally speaking, women are. That's the way men are, generally speaking.
Exactly.
And, your sister's part of that. That's, I'm sure she's a great person towards you. Well, you are genetically related, but, so this is, I think, one of the greatest obstacles. It's not something that's uniquely the province of these progressives and social justice warriors, because as I said, even the anti-feminist camp, you have these people who are just not willing to have an honest discussion about human nature, both male and female nature.
Certainly, there seems to be an element of similarity between certain individuals within the kind of anti-feminist camp and the feminists and social justice warriors, and that they're both terrified of observations and research about human nature informing social policy. So where they kind of dare that, that they just plead that we not go into is that, look, that there are very, very clear sex differences, and as a result, we need to organize our civilization to mitigate, the kind of effects of these differences, possibly in, how we spend our research money, or possibly how we educate the young, or possibly how we, allow individuals to vote. So the feminists, for sure, absolutely do not want logic and the results of inquiry to inform social policy. What they want is emotions and rhetoric and usually just kind of baseless assertions. And within the anti-feminist group, some of these individuals, and I saw the kind of comment thread as well, they're terrified of observations about human nature informing social policy, because the first thing they'll think of is, well, my mother's not like that, or my sister's not like that. So, but actually, absolutely, my mother is most certainly hypergamous, and my daughter absolutely will resort to male disposability whenever possible. I mean, she does this with me all the time. It's, when we're walking down the road, the first thing she'll say is, "Daddy, you walk on the traffic side of the road." She's only 5 years old, but she wants to walk on the safe side of the road. She will use me as a human shield.
Do you think if you had a son, he would be more inclined, sort of risk-taking wise, to, walk on the edge of the road, do you think?
I believe so. And also, I believe if it was a boy, I may also be less biologically driven to kowtow to such a demand. I may just say, what the fuck is wrong with you? I'm not going to walk on that. You take the bloody risk. But, I'm driven by my biology, not only for the parental investment, but for sure because she's a female as well.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. That must be a real challenge. I mean, on the one hand, it's your daughter, and she's carrying half of 50% of your genes, copies, and there's, genetic love and all that. But at the same time, you're a rational man, and you're aware of these things, and you're aware at least of the potential of destructive behavior on her part. I mean, since she's so young still, I mean, do you have any plans on having a discussion with her? And this is like the real discussion. I'm not talking about the birds and the bees, but talking about the way men and women interact, and at least trying to prevent her from engaging in destructive behavior towards men.
Oh, absolutely. That's as soon as I feel she's able to understand these concepts, I'll sit her down and say, look, your enjoyment of life mustn't come at the expense of other people, particularly other men. You have something men want. You're attractive, and men will want that, and as a result, they'll make very, very poor decisions. And what I really expect from you is to do X, Y, Z to, for example, under no circumstance marry a guy, because that will ruin his life, and also work to provide for yourself. A man is not here to provide for you, not because of that strong, independent woman rubbish.
This message seems to run, from what I know of your ex-wife, completely counter to the kinds of influence your ex-wife has
for sure.
on your daughter, though.
For sure. I understand it's going to be a huge fight, and it's not one that I expect to win, but I will make sure my voice is heard so that my daughter understands that, hey, look, my sex aren't here for your benefit. As you're a child, yeah, I'll walk on the dangerous side of the road because I want to make sure you're okay, and I'm more able to predict how a car is moving. You kind of see what I mean? So I can look at its trajectory and its speed, and I can anticipate that in a way you can't. But later on, by the time you're 10, that's not going to happen. By that time, I expect you to understand the world and to behave accordingly. So these are the kind of discussions I plan to have with her, because absolutely, she will immediately resort to male disposability. She will. She's absolutely hypergamous. Absolutely.
And I mean, and it doesn't help that the entire culture is going to back her up in that behavior and legitimate it and say, well, that's fine. You do, you go, girl.
Exactly.
So this seems to be a really just tremendous obstacle for fathers of daughters who, are obviously genetically drawn to their own blood for obvious evolutionary reasons. At the same time, have to recognize that given the climate we live in and essentially the license we give to women to just run roughshod over men, that there's potential for destruction down the line. And I don't envy you the task or other men. I do, however, laud your rationale and your honesty, because your intellectual honesty, because a lot of guys, they'll just jump, oh, my daughter's not like that, my mother's not like my I mean,
I'm yet to meet a woman who isn't hypergamous. So again, I don't believe hypergamy.
Well, it's not just, I mean, I think hypergamy might be overused, but any of these female qualities, such as like nagging. I grew up in my household with my parents who are still married. It's a miracle sometimes, but I mean, my mother was a tremendous nag. I mean, I didn't always get along with my father, but sometimes he wanted to sit down and read his books on astronomy or whatever, and there was always some shit. You don't, you do this. You have to file this away. That, the women are like that.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
And if you want to deal with them, then that's what you got to take into account. Now, I'm fortunate that I don't deal with them, but I do see the wider scale consequences of decisions they make, the financial decisions they make, and so on and so forth. And I mean, the only way I see making a way forward, if possibly, we need more people more females who are intellectually honest like Karen.
Yeah.
People who are willing, women, sorry, not men, men are going to be useless here. Women who are willing to say, yeah, she also left this comment about, the fact that human nature is pretty brutal and cold because those are the circumstances we evolved in. I mean, men used to kill each other over women back in the day. So, and they still do in urban American ghettos. So, a bunch of women like her would be fairly useful. Maybe they could push through. I don't really know, but I'm not particularly optimistic about that. It's just, especially when I have to observe that this might just be evolved psychology, particularly with consumption, that we can only actually provision for the future and save and be fiscally wise and cautious if there's an absolute reason to be, if we can see it. You need to count your pennies until the next month or whatever. I'm seeing myself doing it now too. I mean, I spent, as you know, a shit ton of money on this computer, which still will arrive soon. I have to, because of that, and I had to spend money at IKEA as well. I mean, and now I am counting my pennies more than I did, say, a year ago, because that's what happens naturally. If you don't have to do that, then you just, I'm not excessively, but people, I don't do, but a lot of people just sort of spend, and spend stuff on crap that they never use. So I think the video really is very insightful in the sense that it points out this opportunity cost, the missed opportunities, all the energy being spent on certain things that are just ultimately useless and don't forward humanity or make progress, versus the things that potentially could be.
Exactly, and I do agree with you that it needn't even be as grandiose as a space program, but dealing with some of the issues we have here, energy, desalinization.
Yeah, the thing I mentioned, there's still, before we destroy all the rainforest, there's still potentially hundreds of medicines that can be plant-derived. Why don't we take the 1.2 trillion that we waste on consuming crap and invest it in biochemists and botanists and biologists studying medicinal plants in the Amazon? I guarantee would get better results there.
Exactly.
It's not mysterious why this is happening, but however, I firmly do believe some people need to document this and make an account of these things, and that's what you're doing, and that's what I'm trying to do, because frankly speaking, there aren't many people willing to do that. For most public figures, it's too risky, even if they want to or believe this stuff, for obvious reasons. And most people just don't care, as long as they can eat their Cheetos and take their selfies and take pictures of their half palm size glazed over cherry desserts, then
Well, I met up with a couple of friends for lunch the other day, and we just went to just a really just kind of simple pub, and everybody ordered a beer or whatever, and the table kind of opposite us. A couple of women were having lunch, and there was a bowl of chips, the French fries, and she took a selfie of it and posted it on Facebook, and I just thought, well, who hasn't seen a bowl of French fries before? This is becoming just absurd.
Yeah. Well, I imagine there are some unique chips in the world, but those probably weren't those unique chips. Yeah, the food selfie thing I've been observing for quite some time. It falls under this rubric. It's called food, travel, and culture. My ex-wife, she used to have that on her. She probably still does. She eventually blocked me, but never had no interaction with her. She just woke up one day and blocked me. But anyway, I've seen this before. Under interest, they'll say, it's not universal, but lots of women will say, food, travel, and culture. Now, this means absolutely nothing if you think about food. Well, eat a greasy piece of pizza. That's food too. Is that an interest? Travel, you commute from Brooklyn to Manhattan. That's travel too. Culture, I don't know.
I go to an art gallery once a year.
Yeah. I went to the art gallery in the Guggenheim 2 years ago. No, it doesn't have any meaning. It's meant not to have meaning. It's just vacuous and meant to, sound cool.
Sure.
And when you actually talk to these people, when I talked to my ex-wife or her friends, these were, younger generation than me, 11 to 12 years younger, but still completely vacuous. And the kinds of shit she makes, even then, I don't know if I ever showed you, but she engages in something called industrial design, which is basically making useless furniture. So you're making furniture and household objects that nobody can use. You kind of just put them there. So you imagine making a chair that kind of looks weird and kind of artsy, but you could never really, you couldn't sit on it for more than 3 or 4 minutes. This is what she considers a worthwhile expenditure of her time. Okay, fine, whatever.
I've seen that in a couple of women that I've dated, that I'll get into their homes, and there's like a chair or a table that can't be used. It's just purely there for decoration. And I'll say, okay, well, that's
absurd.
But the amounts they spend on this stuff is just insane.
Yeah. When I was in IKEA the other week with my friend, first off, I couldn't wait to get the hell out of there. He was remarking to me, he's pseudo-married, and he has to go there sometimes with his wife. And he said, oh, it's so much less crowded on a Tuesday than a Saturday. And I said, well, really? And I'm like, I don't want to imagine what this is like on Saturday. And almost to a person, it was some couple, usually a man, being led on a leash, a metaphorical leash, but looking at all kinds of things and tchotchkes, and I couldn't wait to get the hell out of there. I guess my friend was way too accustomed to going there with his wife, but he knew what I want. I was getting a table that I'm using now, the chair I'm sitting in now, which is a lot more comfortable than the wooden thing, and the bed I need to replace. And it said, well, does this look okay? And blah, blah, blah. I said, well, tell me what the price is. Okay, is it functional? Okay, whatever. I wanted to get the hell, get in, get out. All these other people, browsing and looking at these things that just had no real utility to them. Of course, mostly women. And I'm pretty sure. He didn't make any comments. He claimed it was a deal, maybe because he's a male. But my flat's incredibly barren. It's not pretty at all, but it's functional. It works, and I don't really care.
Same with mine. I have where I sleep. I have something to sleep on. I have a computer desk, and I have a wardrobe for my clothing.
Yeah. Well, I don't even have. I have a tiny thing. Back in the day, one of my ex-wives used to disapprove of the way I folded my clothes. I don't even fold my clothing because I don't have to go to like a work job. I usually wash it, dry it, and then just dump it on my bed or something, and then I just pick it up whenever I need it. So to me, that makes more sense than spending tons of time ironing everything. Why would I do that, especially if I don't need to? I don't have a job to go that requires iron clothing.
Exactly.
But some people might. I know people just go through the motions of that anyway. And frankly speaking, it's alien to me. I don't understand how any of these men can countenance this stuff, because I've so outgrown that. But
they put up with it for sexual access. I mean, so for example, the other day I went to IKEA because I needed to buy some furniture for some tenants who were moving into my place, and then I met my younger brother there and his fiancée, his wife to be, and
I imagine you've warned him not to go through with it.
I pleaded with the boy. I pleaded with him not to do it. He just won't listen. So I was done in about half an hour, but because IKEA takes about 25 minutes to walk through, so I'd already figured out on their website what I was going to buy, which was a functional bed, and just like a mattress, and a quilt or whatever. So I got it on their website, got the number, got the aisle number where it was. I just went from one side of the store. I saw him on the way. I was like, okay, well, spoke for about 5 minutes, and I was out of the store, and when I got back home, he was still there. So he'd been there for hours, and they would walk through, and he didn't want to be there. They would talk about, oh, this would look nice with this, and make sense with this, and she was driving all of this, and he just looked bored out of his skull. But
I know that scenario. I used to years and years ago, in my early 20s, one of my ex-wives driving me to these clothing stores, and I didn't tell her in advance, but I decided, if I'm going to do this, I'll just take a book with me and sit on some step or chair someplace and just, she can do whatever. And she got angry at me at the time, and she grabbed the book and threw it across the store and started screaming at me. I mean, now, I should also bring it, this is not relevant to this particular conversation, but this is what I mean about the silliness of our time. Have you heard about the vagina handbags?
No, I haven't heard of it.
Apparently, there's some trend called pussy riots, and it's called the pussy pouch, and it's basically a handbag with a vagina sculpture image on it. I mean, this is apparently trendy and whatever. I mean, this is how frivolous our world has become. I thought I'd just mention that.
I can always see the marketing headlines now. It's about empowerment. It's about just their obsession with being women. It's just insane.
Yeah, it's well, the claim in the article that I was just bringing up right now is that it's their attempt to defend themselves against the prescriptions that they have to present themselves as being more elegant and refined as men. So they go for the vulgar vagina bag or vagina pouch. It's I don't know. But this is what it's all come to. Unfortunately, it's incredibly dismal. I wonder what Thomas Malthus might have, if he were alive today. I mean, he probably couldn't even believe what's going on now. If he had doubts back then.
Sure. Well, it's now a real kind of race, because now new technology that is developed may not benefit us because of the areas where we're investing in. So it's, designing a bag which is shaped like a vagina, or designing, there's a new kind of brand of clothing which doesn't crumple. So, and in the adverts, she can throw it on the floor and wake up the next day, and we're then not really benefiting from science, as a whole, so maybe we get a shirt which is slightly easier to iron, but that doesn't do very much for our species at all, other than maybe the guy's more handsome, so he gets laid more. So for sure, I guess that's a PUA paradise. Well, it's actually pretty interesting that women benefit, obviously, from, at least on a kind of individual level, by just having lots and lots and lots of makeup and all of just this massive malinvestment. And on the flip side of things, you have the PUAs also kind of rushing to take advantage of this. And I just find it really, really interesting that it's almost like what benefits one also benefits the other, just in this race to the bottom.
I think PUAs see themselves as sort of vultures in the chaos. I mean, they kind of see the ship sinking, or it's kind of a perpetual state of sinking, and or they see the house is on fire, or the cityscape is on fire, and I mean, in their own right, they're kind of like the looters, right? They're just, they see the opportunity, they're taking advantage. They don't really care about the beyond whatever loot they can get, getting laid. They don't really care. They have no investment in improving society at large. I'm not saying I do, but at least I have some ideal thing that I'd like to strive towards. But I think that it just kind of fits in. They just see themselves. They wouldn't use these terms, but sort of vultures of the time. The carcasses abound. They're strewn across the landscape. Why not take advantage of them? There's fresh meat there, right? And the female nature and hypergamy, this all plays into it, and male nature. So, yeah, I mean, that, for example, the PUA endeavor, I mean, that just shows you the waste of tremendous male potential.
Exactly. Instead of, let's say, for example, that man understanding about mathematics or engineering or art or physics, or, he spends his time, memorizing, pickup lines and pre-selection theory, and, it's like, okay, well, fair enough.
I wouldn't say every one of us, but many of us, including myself, could be using his time more productive. I mean, look, in a different world, I would be almost certainly in an academic setting, studying human biology and behavioral science and documenting it for the public. I'm 95% sure of that. But what's the point? Like I said, I can't do that because I'd get in trouble for the kinds of research I want to do. So I do that a little bit online, but otherwise I lead a quiet life, unassuming, whatever. And, who knows? Maybe in a different world, you could become the first economist to really integrate human nature, that is, the sex differences, into economic theories. I don't know. I mean, many of us could be doing things that ultimately would be more beneficial to furthering our understanding of the world. And we're kind of held back by the status quo and the way things are. And in the PUA, the vulture of the cityscape or whatever, it's kind of one of the greatest ways, because his declared pursuit is just getting laid. I mean, it's beyond that. That's pretty much it. They claim there are other things to it, but if there were other things to it, there would be PUA sites about, building computers and model cars and multiverse theory, and you generally don't see that. So
exactly. Well, it's entirely about getting laid, because even all of the other things, because they'll say, well, you have to be socially dominant. It at the end of all of this is attracting,
Yeah, and not only that, you got guys like Roosh, who, I mean, I prefer Rollo Tomasi. That guy Roosh is an inarticulate buffoon. Apparently, doesn't believe in evolution.
Yes, I saw his video where he said, look, in neo-masculinity, there's going to be less of an emphasis on the theory of evolution and more of an emphasis on spirituality. And I thought, well, what do you mean by less of an emphasis? It's either you either believe God created the world in 7 days 2,000 years ago, or you don't. So, I mean,
I think it's possible that he might believe that. Maybe he doesn't. I don't really know the details, but it's yeah. So yeah, you just see lots of men wasting their energy doing things that better spent elsewhere, and I think probably would enjoy more. I think ultimately my life would be more fulfilling if I could regularly do the kinds of occasional research I do and actually get grants for it and have discussions and, really go into depth with like-minded people. But, that's not the reality we live in, so.
For sure. But
You just need to accept that.
for sure, but it's still important, I guess, as a thought exercise that we discuss these things.
Well, I think it's more than a thought exercise, Clive. I really do think, and I'll be mentioning this in my forthcoming video, that in the absence of people who are actually willing to do this work, it falls to us lay people, whatever our ineptitude might be, ultimately,
Agreed.
to at least try to document some of this, because no one else is doing it, and we know it exists. We know these phenomena exist. We know that there are data out there that support our theses and ideas. If people have a problem with it, then, engage us on the ideas. I mean, most of the criticism, I've brought this up before, people criticize it. They never talk about the specific ideas. They'll just say, oh, this is a bunch of rambly bullshit. Or, oh, you just sound like, a feminist. Oh, you sound like a race realist. Oh, you sound like, what specific idea do you have an issue with? And we can talk about that. Maybe I'm wrong, but they don't do that. So we need to, somebody needs to do this, I think, because no one else is. And it's incredibly important to document these human behavioral phenomena. The academics are partially doing it, but they think they don't want to leave the hallowed halls of academia.
Agreed.
All the brain neuroscientists that you try to contact, they just think that it should be their own little thing rather than public knowledge. Maybe people want to understand these things, but they're too afraid to. So
agreed. Even the ones who were tenured, because some of the individuals who I contacted were, heads of departments. So I mean, these were pretty, heavyweight individuals who were tenured. Even they don't want to talk about it, because I realized that even with the tenure, so for sure the university can't fire you, but most of your research grants won't come from your university. They'll come from the let's say the NIH if you're in the kind of STEM fields or whatever. So it's very, very difficult to get research grants outside of your university if you go against the orthodox religion of feminism by saying, look, there are very clear differences between the human male and female, and outcomes result from these differences, as opposed to some nefarious political or social conspiracy against females.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this conspiratorial stuff and how that just tends not to fit the data that we have.
Exactly.
But this is necessary, I think, ultimately, and somebody needs to do it. And we might not be specialists in some academic field, and maybe not even the most competent people, but we're willing, and so I think that's enough, at least for a start. And who knows, maybe someone can break down the boundaries and in the future actually push this stuff into, I guess, mainstream academia. I don't know. I doubt it, but
that would be great.
Somebody needs to do something.
That would be great to happen. It would be very, very beneficial to us all.
Yeah, I think so. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up here, and I want to thank Clive for joining me. And, of course, I'll put a link in the low bar to his video on the new Malthusian trap. Great video, very interesting. If you want more details on things we discussed, then check out the video. Very specific, numbers and stats in it. And, yeah, I think everyone would like that. Anything you'd like to add?
No, thank
Clive?
you. Thank you for having me today, Stardust. It's
very
nice to speak.
Always good to talk to you, too. Okay, guys, we'll talk to you later. Take care.